If there's one thing I've learned, it's that getting outside is always worth it, no matter the weather. Welcome to Humans Outside, where we're building a life around spending time in nature while learning from fascinating outdoor-minded guests. I'm Amy Bouchatz, a journalist originally from the beach in California, now working to love nature from my home in Alaska. Since September 2017, I've spent at least 20 consecutive minutes outside every single day, no matter what. Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go! The first time I ever heard the words Kula Kloth, I was sitting exactly where I am today, having a conversation with Judith Sedora, an incredible mental health professional and outdoor recreational therapist who came on the podcast in season 2. She said Kula Kloth was her favorite outdoor gear. So what is it? Well, guys, it's a pee rag. Yes, a pee rag used primarily by women during outdoor adventures far from the convenience of a toilet, pit, or otherwise. If you're a lady, you know the struggle is real. But with Kula Kloth, use it, snap it to your bag, let it dry, reuse, rinse when you can. Okay, but you're probably grimacing right now because who really wants to talk about a rag you use for pee and then carry around with you? Nasty, practical but gross, and yet it didn't take long after I started following the work of Kula Kloth and its founder, Anastasia Allison, that I saw what they're doing is not just not cringy, but Anastasia and her small business run out of her home in Oregon is easily one of the best things in the outdoor gear space and even the internet, thanks to her authenticity, tireless work towards making the outdoors a space for everyone, and the resulting truly hilarious Instagram feed. They even run outdoor-focused class, both in person and virtually, through the Kula Academy. I took one at 5 a.m. one summer morning that taught me how to shuffle dance, and that was a sight to behold. But maybe we'll get to that later. Of course, I didn't have to take a dance class over Zoom to know I had to bring Anastasia on the show to talk about her own outdoor journey, Kula, and the things that drive her. Anastasia, welcome to Humans Outside.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So we start all of our episodes imagining ourselves hanging out in our guest's favorite outdoor space, having a chat. Where are we with you today?
So we are on a rocky ledge that is actually on a hill above my house. It's a pretty simple spot for me to get to, but it's probably the outdoor space where I spend the most time. And it has sort of become the place that I go if I'm feeling any amount of overwhelm from being a business owner. And it's a beautiful rocky ledge. There is moss on the rocks. I can see Mount Rainier in the distance if it's a clear day, and I'm looking down onto the Stillaguamish River, and it is a perfect spot to watch sunrise and sunset, and it's just a place where I instantly feel at peace the second that I'm there.
You're also a musician who likes to play outside. Do you ever take your violin up there?
I have taken my violin up there. I'm the violinist for a small duo called the Musical Mountaineers, and we carry a violin and a piano, or a keyboard rather, into backcountry locations for unannounced sunrise concerts. And my musical partner, Rose, and I have done many concerts from the ledge, and they're all really special to me because it's not that far of a hike, but you can still find that sense of big, wild peace up there on the ledge, and it's just really lovely.
An unannounced backwoods concert probably means it's attended mostly by wildlife, I would guess.
It is an occasional deer, a marmot. We've seen one bear, although the bear did not attend the concert.
Rude.
I know.
All right. So before anything else, we need just some, I think, background information from you. Okay. So can you tell us about you? How did you become a person who likes to go outside?
I have always felt the most myself when I'm outside. As a really young kid, I moved from North Carolina to Pennsylvania when I was about 10 years old. And if folks can think back to when they were 10 years old, it's sort of this awkward middle school esque period in your life. And I had a southern accent, super short hair, and I thought I was Huckleberry Finn. So I, needless to say, I did not fall into the cool group at school. And as a result of that, I was bullied quite a bit. And I started using the outside, and
Hmm.
being outdoors was always a place where I just felt like I could be myself out here and nobody is necessarily judging me or telling me that I'm weird. And so I just was always the kid outside playing in the dirt or playing in a stream, looking for wildlife. And I grew up and was privileged enough to have a family that went camping. Starting when I was about 11, I think I went on my first camping trip, and we were living in Pennsylvania at the time, and my parents took us to all the national parks in the western United States, or at least a lot of them.
So cool.
Yellowstone,
Huh.
yeah, the
Awesome.
Tetons, Badlands, and I did all the junior ranger programs. And I started volunteering for the National Park Service when I was 12 years old at a park in Pennsylvania called Hopewell Furnace National Historic Site. And I decided that I wanted to be a park ranger. And I sort of held on to that dream until I got to college. And I got to college and everybody was pre-med in the school where I went. And I remember thinking, well, gosh, I guess I have to be pre-med too. And so for some strange reason, I switched over to being pre-med. And it wasn't until my senior year of college that I was working in a trauma unit and applying to medical schools. And I sort of had this, I guess, epiphany. I was volunteering at the national park, and the superintendent of the park said, "Well, what do you want to do after college?" And I said, "This is what I want to do. I just want to be at a in a park." And he's like, "Well, why aren't you becoming a park ranger then?" And
Yeah.
it was like the original idea kind of came back to me, and I was like, "Wait, why did I get so distracted for 4 years with this pre-med thing?" And I'm glad I went through college pre-med and had those experiences. That was really great. But I sort of had this renewed interest in becoming a park ranger, and I decided that I was going to go to a law enforcement academy and become a law enforcement ranger, because at the time when I was doing this, it was only a few years after 9/11, and
Hmm.
they were not hiring for interpretive rangers at that point. Most
Hmm.
of the hiring money within the National Park Service was in the law enforcement realm, and so I became a law enforcement ranger. And I had always looked at people who were working in the outdoors doing what I thought were really cool, adventurous things. And I really wanted to do that, but I didn't know how to do it. And I think
Hmm.
being a park ranger was the only sort of word that I could put to somebody who works outside.
Yeah.
And I sort of had the privilege of working as a park ranger for about 7.5 years in Washington State, and I got laid off from that
Mm.
job. And I was really devastated, because being a park ranger is sort of like your identity.
Right.
You're like so attached to it as a part of who you are.
Well, and it comes with such a cool
And
hat, you know? So, like,
it, I, oh, I had to give up that hat, and let me
oh,
tell you, it just broke my heart.
well, I mean, but in
I had
all
to give up the
seriousness,
hat.
it comes like it's a part of your identity, but it literally comes with a uniform that you put on every day. And we're a military family, so I hear this a lot from service members, right? It's just like this act of putting on a uniform that sort of is
Hmm.
icing on the identity cake, you know?
It is, and it's interesting. It's good and it's bad, because it strengthens, I think, our individual egos tend to cling to things that are easy to identify with.
Sure.
And being a park ranger, wearing a uniform, like that is a very, very strong identity. And when you lose it, you're sort of
Right.
left with this question of, who am I? And I had always sort of looked at people who were doing, like I said, these very cool, adventurous things in the wild. And I thought that they had gotten some sort of really lucky code that I
Yeah.
had just not gotten. And I was always a kid, always extremely entrepreneurial as a kid. I was always starting businesses and had a lot of limiting beliefs,
Mm.
particularly around money, particularly around like just things I told myself, like businesses always fail. I mean, that was literally a thing that I believed. And I didn't realize that I was sort of the one standing in my own way of doing something. After I got laid off from being a park ranger, I kind of panicked because I needed a job.
Mm.
And I thought, well, I'm in law enforcement. I guess that's really the only thing I can do. Instead of sort of investigating or being open to infinite possibilities, I sort of tunneled myself into this one career path. And I ended up taking a job as a police officer with the BNSF Railway. The railroad actually has their own police department, which
Mm.
a lot of people don't know. I didn't know it. So if you don't know it, don't feel bad. I didn't know it until I ended up applying for the job. And I got hired as a special agent with BNSF Railway, and I did that for about 5 years. And it was a really cool job. I enjoyed it. There was a lot of aspects of it that I loved, but I was sort of looking down the barrel of, okay, do I want to be patrolling railroad tracks for the next 29 years? And like, is this really what I came here for? And again, that sort of desire to connect with the outdoor community was there. I've been a volunteer backpacking instructor for almost a decade, and I had ideas for things that I wanted to do, but then I would just sort of like convince myself that it wasn't a good idea. Like, oh, I couldn't afford it, or how
Mm.
could I leave my job? Like, that's so irresponsible. How am I going to pay for all my bills? And there was just all these fears like compounding. And I was really in sort of a low place. I was looking for other jobs, this sort of perpetual grass is greener syndrome,
Mm.
not realizing like, hey, wherever you go, there you are. And maybe
Yeah.
maybe the problem is within yourself, Anastasia, and the way that you are talking about things and thinking about the world. And in January of 2017, I was driving home from a snowshoeing trip up to Stevens Pass with
Mm-hmm.
my mom and my husband, and I was driving, and our truck spun out on some black ice and went
Mm.
right into the path of a semi truck.
Oh my gosh.
And it was this very, very surreal moment. Obviously, there's an extremely happy ending because here I am. But
Behold,
it was a
yes.
very, yeah, it was a very surreal moment because in that one moment where I literally was like looking at my own mortality, I felt
Mm-hmm.
no fear whatsoever. There was no, what if this happens? What if that happens? What if I fail? There was no nothing because there was no space for it.
Mm.
And that one incident for me was this catalytic moment to begin looking at all of the quote unquote fears that I was using as sort of excuses in my own life, or
Sure.
maybe as defense mechanisms, which
Mm-hmm.
is also understandable and totally normal. But to talk myself out of pursuing things. And in the previous year, in 2016, I had this idea for an intentionally designed pea cloth. I had the idea while I was on a backpacking trip. I had started using just a scrap of fabric as a pea cloth a few years prior, and I would always teach my students. I had mentioned I was a backpacking instructor,
Mm-hmm.
and I would always teach my students about using a pea cloth and how great it was. And I was taking a photograph of this ugly blue scrap of fabric that I was using as a pea cloth. And my idea, if I'm being completely honest, was to make a series of these photographs into cards to give to a friend as a gift. Like it was going to be this hilarious series of like dramatic wilderness photos of my pea cloth. And that's how Kula was born. Was I was taking a picture of the blue pea cloth in the Wind River Range in Wyoming, and all of a sudden it just felt like this idea was gifted to me.
Mm,
It like instantaneously. It was like, why isn't that a piece of gear? Like, you should do that. And
yeah.
back in 2016, I very quickly talked myself out of it because I
Mm,
did some research and I was like, I don't know how to sew. I don't know how to start a company. This is too expensive. And then fast forward to after that incident in 2017, all of a sudden I didn't really feel like I had much to be afraid of anymore.
hmm.
And I remember thinking, well, yeah, I don't know how to sew, but there's people who do know how to sew. And
Right.
I don't, like, make a phone call, use Google. There's so many resources out there that I like realized, like, oh my gosh, nobody has been preventing me from doing this except for me. And so I just started by calling people that I knew. I called a friend who knew how to sew and said, this is what I want to make. How would I do this? And she loaned me a serger, which is a
Mm.
type of a sewing machine. And I started sewing squares that did not look like squares at first. They looked sort of like clumps of fabric that were like folded over each other because I could not sew.
And
And
regrettably white, if I recall correctly.
they were. I mean, what was I thinking? Like, oh yeah, let's design a pea cloth that people are literally going to be wiping with and potentially having their period while they're using it, and let's make it cream colored. Like, great idea, Anastasia. Luckily, that got vetoed very quickly. So I started sewing these squares, and I would say within a few weeks of sewing them, I felt comfortable enough to like give some samples to my friends, and then people were testing them. And then, gosh, like when something picks up momentum and you are just inspired and excited by it, it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah.
And the right people come out of the woodwork to help you. And I mean, I to put this into perspective of how clueless I was, there was a point. I knew that I wasn't going to be making these kulas. Like, I don't have the technical skill. I needed a production facility to make them for me,
Mm.
but I didn't know what that was called. And so there was literally a moment where I was Googling, how do I find somebody who will make something for me? I mean, like, what is that? Like, I knew what I wanted, but I didn't know the
Right.
verbiage for like cut and sew facility. I
I
had
mean,
no
that's a
clue
new
what
term to
that
me. So,
yeah, I had no idea. And so eventually I now have two production places that make the kulas. But what I've really learned is that if you have this vision for
mm,
something and you believe it's possible, you don't need to know the answers because the answers all come and find you. And
yeah.
it's sort of, it works the opposite that we all think. We all think, "Oh, I need a perfect plan from A to Z. I need to know everything in advance. I need to have everything planned out." And oh, that is so paralyzing because now you're spending so much time envisioning out future imaginary scenarios that
Right.
aren't even real.
Yeah.
And I would say that I'm a bit of a non-traditional entrepreneur. I've literally never done a business plan. I tend to be a little bit more free flow and free form about how I run the business because that's what works for me. I
Hmm.
would never like put my own method on somebody else, but I will say that there isn't one way to run a business. And if something doesn't feel good, it probably means that you should be doing it a different way. Like, just
Yeah.
because it's the way doesn't mean that you should be doing it.
So I want to go back to something you just said about overthinking stuff because I think that's a big. I mean, I'm sure you see this teaching backpacking, or people in Alaska at how to shuffle. who can say?
Mm-hmm.
But there's a there's being prepared, which is good, and then there's overthinking it and never leaving. You know, never going and having that adventure, never going backpacking, never doing this thing because it's a little scary. And instead of just walking out your door, you spend a lot of time coming up with every possible way you might die by a bear attack, um, even though it's
Yes.
extremely unlikely, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so that just, you know, I just think that's such a good parallel lesson there that uh that, you know, it's possible to overthink something.
Yeah, well, and I think one of my favorite books is Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. And
Mm,
I mean, I've probably read it 10 times. And one of the things that Eckhart talks about a lot in that book is, I mean, obviously it's the power of now, but he's sort of talking about recognizing whether we are living in the moment and being present, or if we are living in an imagined reality that hasn't actually happened yet, and
mm,
how paralyzing that can be. And if I am being honest with myself, I look back at my own life and I didn't ever take action on things, not because of something that was happening in the present, but because of what I thought could happen in the future. And so it was like a self sabotaging cycle of like,
right.
oh, well, this horrible thing could happen, so I might as well just not do it.
Yeah.
And it repeats itself and repeats itself. And for me, when I, after that incident, the snowshoeing driving home incident happened, one of the end, actually, while I was a police officer, I became very interested in the practice of meditation.
Mm,
And that for me has been the biggest part of learning how to detach from the thoughts in my mind and seeing them as thoughts that exist based on conditioned beliefs that I have, you know, some of them have been passed down to me, and
mm-hmm.
everybody is in a different situation and everybody has different belief systems that they've grown up with. And a belief is just something we've thought over and over again. And very often we don't question them. We just think, oh, that's true because I believe it. And when you start to meditate and when you start to recognize that your thoughts are just these sort of, I guess, energetic forms like flowing through your sphere of awareness, you they tend to start to lose their grip on you a little bit, and
Yeah.
you one by one start to free yourself from them and be like, oh, if I didn't have this belief about all businesses always failing, like, is it possible that there are businesses out there that are successful? Like, could I name 5 businesses that are doing well right now? Yeah, I probably
Right.
could. And is it possible that my business could be one of those businesses? Absolutely. Um, and what's so interesting is that what we focus on is what grows and what we become ultimately. And so I,
Mm,
I think that with Kula, I've just, that's what I focused on is like, if I tell myself the story, this business isn't going to be profitable for the first 5 years. Well, guess what? Guess what I should expect? It not to be
right.
profitable. But you know, I told myself right off the bat, there's no reason why my business can't be profitable year one, and it was.
Yeah.
And so it's been really cool. I mean, not like a huge profit, but that doesn't matter. It's sort of like questioning those things that we just say without thinking about them, and then you can start to have fun with it too, because you can play around with like big ideas and dreams, and then really use what you're doing to make a difference
Yeah.
in a meaningful way.
Yeah. So in, gosh, I want to say it was last season, we had an interview with a guy named Cordell Glass who talks about creativity outdoors. And he talks about exactly that, that going outside is such a good place to learn how to break down those self-limiting beliefs, because you can say, well, I don't know how to, let's just say backpack, right? I don't know how to backpack, therefore I would not be good at backpacking, therefore I am not going backpacking. um
Mm-hmm.
and when you create that box for yourself, well, of course you live in it, But if you start the
Yeah.
conversation by saying, well, I mean, I've never been backpacking, so I don't know if I'm good at it or not. So there's
Yeah.
only really one way to find out. Maybe I really
Yeah, well,
like
it's
peeing
just
outside.
exactly. Well, and it's all about like how we talk about ourselves and can we be open. I used to tell myself that I was not a morning person, and guess what? I never woke up early
Mm,
because I told myself and everybody else. I made sure that everybody else knew I'm not a morning person, and
mm,
so I barely could drag myself out of bed at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. And now I decided that I wanted to change that story about myself and I did. I mean, it wasn't overnight, but I started telling myself that I'm somebody who loves waking up in the morning and I feel energetic and I love moving or dancing in the morning. And lo and behold, a few months into doing that, I'm easily waking up at 4:30 in the morning, 5 in the morning, and like really getting to
hmm
enjoy that and feeling good all day. And
Yeah.
it's pretty cool when we realize that we can change our story by changing how we talk and what we focus on and being open to possibilities and not boxing ourselves in.
Hey humans, just a quick break to ask for a huge favor. If you're loving this episode, could you take a second to give us 5 stars or a great rating and review in whatever podcast platform you use? Those ratings help other humans find the podcast too and spread that humans outside love around the world. I can't thank you enough for listening and sharing your support through a rating and review. Now, back to the episode. Okay, so you created a pea cloth, which, as I said in the introduction, gets a lot of grimaces. Okay, but probably from people who have never used one because they don't know how great it is. And I say this with some authority, having both never used one and also used one. So, so, and I actually gifted a Kula to my youngest sister who came and visited me up here in Alaska not very long ago, and we took
Oh,
our Kulas on a little trip, and photographing your peak rag and scenic places is totally a thing. So I feel that.
I
Um,
love it.
so what is most surprising? I mean, you've created a very practical product. There's no question that this is needed, and yet what has most surprised you about running Kula and folks' reactions to what I'm going to go ahead and say is a vital piece of gear?
Well, thank you. I think it's vital too. And as the founder of the company who has forgotten my Kula on several trips, embarrassingly enough, like it's on those trips, like I'm like devastated. And it has nothing to do with like me being the owner of the business. It's like, no, like it makes that much of a difference
Yeah,
that
big time.
if I don't have it, I'm just feel disgusting.
And
So,
and let's just like
um,
back up and say like for people who are maybe dudes and don't have this problem, um, as a woman, your options are pretty limited, right? You're bringing toilet paper, you're doing the drip dry method, which ain't great, guys. Okay,
mm-mm.
or you're having a product like this. Like those are the options.
Yeah.
And the first one is prohibitive because it means you probably are now carrying dirty toilet paper around with you. Not great. If you remember to bring toilet paper, and I hope we have time to hear your to hear your story about your first backpacking trip, which I heard you tell in another podcast I listened to recently, and it was very funny. So we need to hear that. But like that's not great. And then the second one is drip dry. Well, that's not sanitary after in the long term. And so then the third is a pee rag. So here we are. Okay. So what are folks' reactions to this? Like, what's weird
So
about this?
it's sort of it's mixed when I have a very funny career now because I'm usually talking to people about peeing within the first 5 minutes of meeting a new person. And that is pretty funny. So typically, if somebody has never heard of a pea cloth, it is probably a similar reaction to what I had when I first heard about it, where initially you're sort of like stunned and like, oh, like gross. I don't know if I would do that. And then you try it because it is a pain point. Like anybody who has spent time outside and has drip dried or had to carry around a ton of extra toilet paper or dirty toilet paper. That is a pain point. And also seeing toilet paper blooms discarded in the wilderness is also a pain point for people
Right.
because those are things we all like share commonly that we don't like. And so people are then typically open to using it. And I think one of the reasons why we've intentionally made the kulas so beautiful and have these like really wonderful art on it is because number one, it makes the product less squeamish, it makes it more beautiful, and it makes it something that people feel proud of. It does not feel like a jokey sort of like shameful type of hygiene product. Like
Right.
it's this fun thing that you could be proud of. And once people use it, typically like I will get letters from customers who will just say that it was life changing for them. I One of the messages that really has always stood out to me was woman, a middle-aged woman who sent me a message and said that she had been dehydrating herself on
Mm,
hikes and not drinking water because she didn't want to have to pee on the hike because she wasn't really sure how to handle the hygiene for that.
mhm.
And that now with the Kula, she was able to go on like long day hikes because she wasn't afraid of it anymore. And something like that is
Right.
really exciting. Like knowing people are more comfortable outside, to me, that is a vehicle to exactly what we talked about earlier, which is like more time outside, more creativity, more
Right.
connection with ourselves and the planet. And so, if Kula can be a tiny part of that, then I think that that is important to me. The other thing that really excites me is hearing stories about people meeting other people on a trail with a kula and that it being like an instantaneous connection and a conversation, and it's sort of become this fun thing like where if you see somebody with a kula on a trail, those people always say hi to each other.
Mm.
And I love that that type of good energy is out there in the world and that it is maybe breaking down some barriers. I actually got an email yesterday from a woman who said that when she got her Kula in the mail, she thought it was kind of silly that on the postcard we send out, it says something like, when you see somebody else with the Kula, say hi or,
Mhm.
smile at them. And she said, I thought that was kind of dumb. And then I was out hiking and I saw somebody else with a Kula and I got really excited about it. And I went and said hi to her. And now I like met this new friend because of a pea cloth. And so to me, that is really exciting.
Yeah.
And those are sort of the stories that, I'm sitting at home packing up orders or, doing the sort of administrative side of running the company. And I love knowing that that is what's happening out there. Like how many kulas are out on adventures today? I have no idea, but that's so exciting for me to think
Well, I
about.
just took mine on a glacier. I mean, it wanted to go on a trip, so off we went, you know.
Oh, I'm taking mine tomorrow out for a hike, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, it's like a pet. You gotta walk it, you gotta take it on
Mm-hmm.
adventures.
Yes, you do.
um, well, what you've been talking about though is a tool that creates accessibility. You mentioned the woman who is now comfortable going on these long day hikes because she knows how to take care of business for lack of a better description. um
Mm-hmm.
and it's a lot of this is focused at women.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that yeah, I think a lot about inclusivity and privilege and that kind of thing. We're both, people can't see you, but we're both white women who live in places that have easy access to nature. You're in Washington State, I'm in Alaska. We're not people who face a lot of barriers around getting outside. And we're not people who are told literally or figuratively that going on big adventures or simply spending time outside where we live isn't something that we do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
what has running Kula taught you about creating inclusive spaces and an inclusive environment for other people?
I think I grew up seeing people like me in the outdoors.
Mm,
And so I am somebody, as you mentioned, who comes from just a massive amount of privilege with accessibility to the outdoors from a very, very young age. And when I started working with Kula, I think one of the first things that I realized was how important it is to listen to and validate the stories of other people who have not had that type of upbringing or that access, and then to use the privilege that I have in order to support them directly or
mm,
in order to support organizations that are out there doing that type of work. And I think it would be completely blind for Kula to say that that isn't a reality. Like, it would just be such a huge blind spot in our business to pretend that that isn't a problem.
mm-hmm,
And I think that if we aren't using our product as a vehicle for good, then we're missing a really important piece of the puzzle.
mm,
When I started Kula, it's when you start a business, it's sort of very self-centered, and I say that not necessarily like in a look at me type of a way, but it's you're focused on like, okay, I'm gonna have this business and be successful and have these accomplishments, and along the way you sort of realize that the number of sales that you have or the success of your product, though, that is not what's actually important. It is the people that you can interact with along the way and the way that you choose to use what you're doing to make the world a more inclusive place for everybody. Like, it's how you
yeah,
show up in every moment and every situation for people. And I think my sister, who helps me with social media, I think she wrote something really beautiful. Last year we released a solidarity kula, and we gave
mm,
100% of the profits of that to different organizations that were helping underrepresented groups get into the outdoors. And she said something to the effect of, if a pea cloth can do this, then so can everybody.
mm,
And
mm-hmm. I remember that. Yeah.
yeah, and it seems funny that like a pea cloth would be just on the surface level when you say it, like, oh, a pea cloth that is working for inclusivity. But if we aren't going to do it, then who will? And if we can do it, then I believe everybody can. And it just
Yeah.
starts with looking out. And I think my sister also said something about, you know, being eco. It starts with respecting the rights of everybody
Mm,
to
mm-hmm.
be out on the trail. And that's where we start, is
Yeah.
by including everybody, making people feel welcome and that they belong, listening to them when they say that they don't feel like they belong, and then asking ourselves, what can we do better to make sure that they do? And then also being open enough um, to take feedback in places where we have not been as inclusive as we could, or where we have maybe not represented groups
Right.
in certain things that we've worked on, and being open to hearing that instead of immediately
Right.
getting defensive.
Right. Right. So I'm thinking about like the small steps concept.
hmm
So let's just describe what a kula looks like. It's like what, 3.5 inches maybe is square.
it's actually, it's a little bit, I believe that they are about it's a 6 by 6
6 by 6.
square.
Okay.
Yeah, six by
Estimates not
six,
my
and
thing.
that's okay. You were
Only
like
double
just
what I
fifty
thought. It's
percent
fine.
off. You were just 50% off. You're
That's
good.
fine. Okay, so it is a 6 by inch square fabric. The one side is like water resistant. The other side is
Absorbent.
Yeah, thank you.
Absorbent.
I talk for a living. It's fine. But I don't estimate. Okay. The other side is absorbent. And the idea is that you use one side and the other side is safe to touch if, if needed, although please don't touch my Kula. And
Yep.
for your own, safety. And yeah, okay, so this is not like a very big, my point is, this is not a big product. Like it is in size, it is small. But it is a small thing solving a big problem in a, very practical, one step at a time kind of way. Um,
Yes.
and that is, I think, a lesson to us. You talked about overthinking earlier. We tend to overthink a lot of stuff, and being inclusive
Mm-hmm.
is one of them. And
Mm-hmm.
if a pea cloth, a 6 inch, by 6 inch square pea cloth, can solve a huge problem for a lot of people, um, by just existing, what else are we overthinking on this subject? That's sort of a rhetorical
Yeah.
question, but like I think we think about change as having to be big, instead of
Mm-hmm.
incremental, or instead of just
Yes.
something little that we can all do.
Yeah. Well, and I think it starts with each of us. I think if you're looking at making these huge, big, dramatic plays and like changing everybody's mind and getting everybody to think exactly like you,
Right.
that's going to be really frustrating. But if you can just start within yourself and ask, like, okay, what is what does the world that I want to live in look like? Like, how do people treat others? How do people love others? And how can I model that? And then trust that like when that's how you live, other people notice it, and it does ultimately ripple out into the world. I'm not saying don't go actually take action,
Right. Right.
um, but I do believe that it starts with each of us, like looking at our own lives and recognizing certain things that might be difficult to look at first, but I think that's an important part of it. And then starting from there, envisioning out, like, what do we want the outdoor space to look like in like, if I could envision it, what would it look like out there and how would people feel, and thinking about that, and then allowing my actions to be inspired by the vision of what I believe is possible. And I
Yeah.
think if people can do that, like harness the feeling of what we want now, believe it's possible, and then let's just see what happens. Like, what actions do we all get inspired to that are going to line up with the realization of what we want to create in the world? And so I think ultimately that's part of why Kula was gifted to me. I mean, maybe this sounds corny, but I think that in some way the world is shifting towards being more accepting of people. I'm not saying that there are not people out there who are not quite there yet, because there are.
Yeah.
But I think that the world is trying to find a way, and the more that people are looking beyond the physicality of the product or the business and looking for ways in which what they're doing can make an impact, it starts to spread.
Mm.
And it's becoming, I hope that it will become the norm and not the exception. And I'm really proud that Kula is a part of that in a small way, and I hope that it inspires other brands to do that as well, and not from like a brand or a marketing standpoint, but
Right.
from like, this is the right thing to do for other humans perspective. um, and I'm just excited for opportunities to continue to use Kula to support the people who are doing a lot of really amazing work. Most recently, we have had the opportunity to give to an organization called Unfilter the
Mm.
Outdoors, which is giving micro grants to BIPOC individuals who
Mm-hmm.
are hoping to like get into hiking. And that's really, I've
Awesome.
been working with that group for a while, and it's really fun to watch those types of projects come to fruition.
Awesome. That's so great. Okay,
Yeah.
not to pivot wildly away from a super serious topic, but I do want everyone to hear about your first backpack because I mean, I didn't plan to ask you about this, but then I heard that story and I just, I really had to,
It's a
we had
good
to share
one.
it. Yeah.
So my very first backpacking trip, relatively stupidly, was climbing Mount Baker. So, for those of you who don't know, Mount Baker is a nearly 11,000 foot tall glaciated volcano here in the Pacific Northwest. Now, I did have a lot of hiking experience. I had absolutely no glacier travel experience whatsoever. And I was just sort of in this state of completely ignorant bliss. And I got invited on this trip, and I asked the trip leader. I remember asking him, like, what do I pack? And he said, well, just go to REI and you can rent an ice axe and crampons and a harness, and then just pack what you'd normally pack for a backpacking trip and you'll be good. And I just remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, like, I don't know what to pack for a backpacking trip, but I can't tell this guy because then maybe he'll disinvite me from the trip. And so I sort of cobbled together this total just cluster of gear to bring on this trip, and got up to the campsite, and we're camping in this sort of rocky outcropping called the Hog's Back. And for some reason, right, I've never been backpacking. I think I thought, like, maybe there's a toilet there. And yeah, there was not a toilet there. There was not a toilet, and I didn't bring toilet paper, not one square of toilet paper. And so this is a 2-day trip, and I most definitely had to use the bathroom at some point. And so I stole toilet paper from my tent mate. And when I say stole, sometimes when you say steal, you mean it like kind of cutesy, like, oh, I stole toilet paper from her. Yeah, no, this was like, she was not in the tent, and I specifically waited until after she was out of the tent, and I went into her pack very quickly so as not to be discovered, stole some toilet paper, and then, like, left, to go to the bathroom. And poor Janet, I don't even know if she knows to this day. I don't think she has social media, and I don't know if she's ever listened to a podcast I've been on. So Janet, if you end up listening to this, I'm sorry, I did steal your toilet paper. But I was so embarrassed. There was this older guy leading this trip, and I think I was 20, maybe 26 at the time when I did this, and I was just so embarrassed to, like, ask him about, like, what do I do to go to the bathroom?
Yeah.
And so I just wasn't prepared and had no clue, and stole toilet paper, and that worked. And I remember thinking, like, oh my gosh, if I could do something to save anybody else from this level of, like, number one, just, like, sort of humiliation, and then number two, like, being completely immoral and unethical, like, on the side of a mountain, like I would do it. And so I find it just super ironic now that I started a company that makes, like, essentially what is reusable toilet paper for pee only, I might add. Don't use Kula for poop, but pee only. It's just, I feel like it's really come full circle for me, right? And I give away a lot of Kulas because giving is a daily practice for me, intentionally, and also just, like, a fun thing to do. But I feel like I am just perpetually paying penance for the stolen. No, I'm actually, I've released myself from the guilt over it at this point.
But it's such a good story.
It's pretty funny, and it also goes to show too that everybody starts somewhere.
Right.
I mean, I started my first backpacking trip not bringing toilet paper. I didn't bring, even more tragic than the toilet paper was that I did not bring sunglasses to climb a volcano. I brought a pair of pink ski goggles. So I did have eye protection, but it was pink ski goggles, And so in all of these photographs of me, I'm wearing like shorts with tights underneath, pink ski goggles, and then I only brought SPF 15 and I got burned like in my nostrils everywhere. Oh, it was just a
Oh,
calamity of errors, and I was so sore. I couldn't walk for a week. I did Summit Baker for the record. Did
congratulations.
not, yeah, miraculously. I mean, some of the I like look back on it now and just think like, oh my gosh, like I really did not know anything about crevasse rescue, if I'm being honest. So I would recommend, if you want to climb a volcano, like actually get some technical skills, know
Hmm.
what you're doing before you just sign up for a trip, and go do it without having any clue whatsoever what you're doing, which is what I did. I
And
did
always
then go,
wear sunglasses on a glacier and sunscreen because that sucker
yes,
rate like it magnifies lights because it's white and icy. So in case you've
yeah.
never thought about this, guys, glaciers burn. So
Yeah, it was extremely intense. But I still remember, after I did that one climb, I was just totally hooked. And
hmm.
I had never felt anything quite like that before. Like being on a volcano, being able to like look down in the whole Puget Sound that day, the whole Puget Sound area was covered in clouds, and you could see the tops of all the other volcanoes peeking up, and it was just this like, oh, I was just in heaven up there. And I
Hmm.
think that trip ultimately was what sort of got me started with this obsession of like getting out and backpacking, which of course ultimately led me to where I am now. And yeah, so it's still, even though the trip was a cluster, it's still very sentimental experience to me.
Oh my goodness. Such a good story. And isn't it in those moments where we're like, just like epic fail situation where I don't know about you, maybe it's because I'm a story person, but even in those moments, I'm like, yep, I am suffering now, but this will be a very good story later. So,
Yes, exactly. It's always the horrible stories that we retell. Nobody ever is like, "Oh, it's so perfect."
yeah, no, it's disaster. It's disasters and fails. It's, that's,
Yep.
and all of my adventures have some sort of epic disaster in them. I mentioned I took my Kula on a glacier hike, for example. We did an ice climbing trip, my husband and I. And towards the end of, well, about three-quarters of the way through, the guide who was doing was helping us belay. You climb up and then you like rappel down the face of the ice. He was really wanting, bless his heart, for me to not have to stand in like a foot of water and basically just get super wet feet and then have to hike back.
Hmm.
So he's like, I will let you down, like I'm gonna lay you down, and when you get your feet under you, you can stand up, all will be well. But he didn't wait for me to get my feet under me, and he dropped the rope, which I was like leaning
Oh
into. So
no.
instead he dunked me in 2 feet of ice water, like
Oh
gadunk.
my gosh. Oh
And even as this
no.
is happening, like I'm being dunked in water, like a graham cracker in milk, y'all. Even as this is happening, I'm thinking this is cold and also funny. So
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's wild.
and that's how it goes first. Okay, so we must wrap up, even though I could talk to you all day, as I'm sure you could tell. Uh,
Oh.
we finish our episodes talking about our favorite and most essential outdoor gear. You are allowed to say that Kula is it. That's okay if that's how you're feeling. We don't discriminate.
Okay, I got it. So you said most essential outdoor item?
Yes, most essential and favorite, or sometimes those are the same thing. So you just tell us, what do you love? As I said, I got turned on to Kula because of someone else's recommendation in this section of the show. So there is
Okay,
power
well,
here.
I have one answer for the my favorite outdoor gear, and this is actually a piece of gear designed by one of my friends named Merrick Bowers, who's the founder of a company called Rology.
Okay.
And Merrick basically invented this super lightweight cork ball that you can take on backpacking trips or hikes to sort of like roll out.
Hmm.
And let me tell you, like when you get to camp and can like give yourself a legitimate like foot massage, or like give your partner a back massage, or like lean up against a tree and like get knots out of your back, it is like you end up feeling like $1,000,000 while you're backpacking, which is something I've never experienced before. So
Hmm.
I would definitely say a Rology ball is probably my favorite outdoor gear item. Tied with Kula. And then and then my most essential outdoor gear item, I'm gonna have to say two. I will have to say it is a Kula, and I'm saying that not as the founder of the company, but as somebody who has forgotten theirs on a couple trips. And it's devastating. And then this isn't a piece of gear, but I have a habit of carrying homemade chocolate chip cookies with me, and that feels extremely essential.
Hmm.
And I just there's nothing I enjoy more than eating like a chocolate chip cookie in nature.
And if I recall
So
correctly, you offer said chocolate chip cookies on some of your Kula Academy trips.
I do. I if the bribery is laid on thick enough, or the sort of yeah, I will bake. The last Kula event we had, it was a river rafting event, and I baked like 25 gigantic homemade chocolate chip cookies and gave them out to all the participants, and it was really really cool, and also everybody really liked them, so that made me feel good. It's always like nerve-wracking when you bake something for
Yeah,
people and they're
for
like,
sure.
and then you have to like wait for the moment where you watch their face,
Yeah,
um and you're like, oh gosh, please like it. So
totally.
yeah, cookies and coolers.
There you go. Maybe not at the same exact time, but
Maybe not at the, yeah, just maybe like a 5 minute intermission between the two of those.
okay. Finally, and last but not least, walk us out with your favorite outdoor moment. If you're going to close your eyes, picture yourself somewhere just like that moment that gives you peace. I mean, we heard about where you like to hang earlier when we started, but maybe there's somewhere like a moment or just a snapshot in time that you go back to. Where are you and what are you doing?
It is September 1st of 2017, and it is the very first Musical Mountaineers concert.
Hmm.
And Rose and I have woken up at 2 a.m., driven to a trailhead, hiked in the dark to this off trail tarn, and it's really warm out, warm enough that we are both wearing gowns without puffies over them, and we are both standing barefoot on these big granite slabs.
Hmm.
And it is just before sunrise, and so the colors in the distance are starting to get pink and yellow and purple. And as the sun starts to come up, we start playing a song together. And at the end of the song, so we play this beautiful song, and when you play a song in nature, when you play music in nature, there is no applause because it's just the two of us standing there playing music. And I, more than anything, love the creation of music in that moment just as much as I love the silence afterwards, and that feeling of just like total peace. And there's a recording of that. There's actually a video, but there's a recording of the audio of that moment.
Hmm.
And I can be heard saying, I wonder if anybody heard us. And it's just a really special moment because when we did that concert, I couldn't have possibly imagined all the cool things that I would get to do with the Musical Mountaineers. That was actually before Kula. It was sort of in the beginning phases of creating Kula, and Musical Mountaineers was like a huge part of sort of keeping me focused on things when I got scared or overwhelmed by creating a business. The Musical Mountaineers was sort of always this experience that really grounded me and brought me back to the present moment, which is sort of getting me out of that overthinking mode and keeping me here in the now. And so those that first concert was just so special to me.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's just a lovely experience.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing with us. And thank you so much for being on Humans Outside today. I really appreciate you.
I just loved this conversation, and I so appreciate the time you took to ask such meaningful questions.
Well, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Humans Outside. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not give us a little love and leave a rating and review to make it easier for other listeners to find the podcast too? It really does make a difference. Until next time, we'll see you out there.